Welcome to the Geek to Geek podcast, where we have a massive topic tonight. I'm Void, and I'm here with my co-host Beej.
I'm not the massive topic. I'm not fat.
Tonight we're talking about MMOs. And before we get into the main topic, I just wanted to say I have a thunderstorm going on in the background, so if you hear noise like that, it's on my end, but I'll do the best I can to clean it up in post. Anyway, we're talking about MMOs tonight. We're not going to do a super deep dive into any one, because we could probably do a whole podcast on a lot of these, and we might eventually. Yeah. This is more like, we haven't talked about MMOs nearly at all, so we want to get our baseline and our history with MMOs and our general feelings out there for you guys.
And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, the reason I wanted to talk about MMOs is because for me, this is the main genre of games that I've played since I was 15 years old. That this is just the biggest influence in terms of gaming that I've had is just online gaming. So it's very hard to just think about doing this in an hour.
Yeah, and I think I've probably put more time into MMOs than any other genre of games out there, but I don't.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that it actually takes up that much more mental space for me. I know a lot of people get into an MMO and it never kind of leaves their mind, and I'm pretty good at just kind of leaving them in the past when I'm done with them. And I like talking about them, I like thinking about them, but I don't obsess over them like a lot of people do, which is also kind of interesting for me.
Yeah, and that's really interesting for me because I'm the kind that obsesses over it. I've had to pull back from online gaming specifically because of an obsessive, addictive personality. So to hear you say, oh, I can play them and, it's like, oh, I don't understand how your brain works. How do you do that? How do you play these?
Yeah, I play them a lot like a single player game. If a bunch of people that I know are also playing it, then I like grouping and I like doing some end game content, but I like seeing new things in games. So once you actually hit end game, I don't like the gear treadmill. I don't like the grind. I don't buy into that part of it. So I'm okay with just, I'm done with this game. I'm not having fun. I'm stepping away from it. I'm not going to keep doing it week after week just because it's there. And that's one of the reasons we're already on tangents, but that's okay. That's one of the reasons that subscription MMOs really bug me in a lot of ways. I feel like if I'm paying that subscription, I have to be making the most of the money, even though in the grand scheme of things, $15 a month is not that much. It's like what you're paying for Netflix and Hulu put together cost you more than an MMO in a month. But when you know that the money's coming out every month and you're paying for the time in game, I feel like I should be playing that more than anything else. And I hate that feeling so much more than I don't even know. I don't know. It just bugs me.
At what point in your MMO career did you get to that realization? Because it took me a good decade into playing World of Warcraft, which was over 15 years in terms of overall MMOs, to get to that point where I realized that issue.
So it was probably when I came back to WoW the second time, which we'll talk our histories here in a second, but when I came back to WoW the second time, I played the end of Burning Crusade. I caught up right before Wrath of the Lich King came out, and it was when I hit endgame of Wrath of the Lich King. So it was really the first time that I ever got to endgame content that I could consistently do in WoW. That was when I figured it out.
And it was just a little past that for me. It was all the way through Cataclysm that I realized it. It was before Pandaria was released where I was done. I was done at the end of Cataclysm. I killed Deathwing and logged my character out. And I was like, I've completed where this is. Then I started playing much later when I had mono, but that's different.
Yeah, well, for me, when I played vanilla, I hit the level cap, but there weren't really tools in the game to be able to play it casually at endgame. Because it was vanilla, it was missing so much. And for me, I didn't actually get to that real end game, gear treadmill, just grinding it out. I never hit that in any MMO until I hit that in Wrath of the Lich King. So it was the very first time I hit that ever across any MMO. That's when I realized that I just hate that feeling of that end game grind, paying money every month. It's kind of all of that put together. I don't like the way it makes me feel.
Which I completely get. I don't like the way it makes me feel now. I think I was looking for that when I was younger, that kind of constantly searching and trying to, better myself. I was using it and projecting a lot into, I can do this and get shiny things, and I wasn't doing it in real life.
No, I see that. And maybe, we should jump back and talk history here. So we should go probably chronologically, just because we probably have things to talk about the same games, whereas normally that's not always the case. I think you had more Ultima Online, so you're probably where we start off here.
Okay, so we've talked about me being a slumlord in Ultima Online before, and if you guys haven't listened to that episode, I talk a lot about Ultima Online in the episode where we talk about our gaming habits change, but most of all, I actually started with Diablo. Even though it's not an MMO, that was my introduction to online games, because I wanted to play Ultima Online, and my mom, when I was 15 years old, wouldn't give me her credit card. And so Diablo didn't require one, so my friends and I played it together. And then when we were finally able to get the credit card, we had to make a decision. EverQuest and Ultima Online were out at the same time, and we had to decide which of these games we were going to play, because we were at our parents' expense playing these games, and they were willing to subscribe for us. And so we had to decide, would we rather play EverQuest, which is a treadmill level-based fighting monsters game, or would we rather play Ultima Online, where you are living in a world and fighting other people? And we chose fighting other people with Ultima Online and living in this world, because EverQuest didn't ever feel that way for us. So we wanted one where we use skills, and the main thing that we loved about Ultima Online was that you could do anything. It was so much more open-ended than EverQuest, that you just had skill points instead of levels and classes. That was perfect for us. It was my perfect introduction to online gaming, because it wasn't very gamified. You were just out doing things. There weren't quests, there weren't levels, there weren't experience points to earn. It was, you get put into the game and you have a few things in your backpack and you just figure out what's going on. You go to a shop and pick up an axe, and you can become a carpenter. If you pick up a spear, you become a fencer. It's just whatever you want to do. There's no introduction or tutorial. So that was what we wanted at the time. And still, I have this feeling of just wonder at the expansiveness of this game, where I felt like I really could accomplish anything, which I've really never felt in another MMO, because of how gated the content tends to be.
And I think this kind of points to one of the fundamental differences between us, because I think you like sandbox games a lot more than I do still. Even if it's a single player game. I will get bored in a sandbox if I don't have a critical path to follow, if I don't have things that I can latch onto that feel like progression. I like the feeling of progression as long as I'm getting to new content along the way. So around this same time when you were doing Ultima Online, I fell on the other side of it. I did EverQuest. So me and my whole friend group in probably middle school, I think. I was looking at the time frame of when things came out. We played a ton of EverQuest. And for me, my first online games weren't Diablo. It was probably another Blizzard game, actually, StarCraft. StarCraft was like my first big online game. So after StarCraft, it was EverQuest. And EverQuest just blew me away. Like, have some friends that I played with at the time that now that we're like, around 30, they've gone back to some of those old servers that have the original game code running, and they can still enjoy it. I tried that at one of their houses, and there's no way I can ever go back to EverQuest.
I did the same thing. I installed it and couldn't stand it. And I spent a lot of time in EverQuest down the road after a few expansions. Even the first expansion, I went and started to play EverQuest. And going back now, it was just a couple of months ago that I did it. I believe it was over the summer. I could not stand playing that game anymore. The genre has moved on, and it was awesome.
Yeah, but at the time, I absolutely loved it. Like, EverQuest is always going to have this like magical place in my heart for being the first online world that I was a part of. Even though it wasn't my first online game, it was the first one that, like you said, it felt like a living world with other people in it, doing things, accomplishing tasks, making progress. I love that feeling of progress and leveling up, finding new zones, training mobs to the zone, and like things like just Crushbone. Like, I still have the layout of Crushbone Castle just in my memory forever. Like, I don't know how many times I trained mobs to the zone from there. And I'm
going to interrupt you here because I have to ask you a question. You've read Ready Player One, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you know the part where he goes in and has his friend drop him in a zone and starts killing orcs?
Yep.
At the very beginning? I see that in my head every time as Crushbone.
Yeah, I could see that.
Do you do that, or is that really just me? Because when you get dropped into this zone, I think of EverQuest and Crushbone and him going around and just farming orcs in EverQuest.
Yeah, I can totally see that for sure. But yeah, EverQuest, that's where I started MMOs, and I've loved it.
So I'm curious with this, that how do you not like the gear grind? Because that was one of the biggest turnoffs for me with EverQuest, is how it was a constant treadmill, how I was always trying to push through that. I saw the exploration and the fun, and I had a great deal of it, but it was never as awe-inspiring, I guess, as some of the other games because of that kind of grindiness.
And, I remember the grindiness for levels, but I had this friend group that we were all playing together. So there were always other people online. There was always a group. And I never felt like I was stuck on a gear treadmill, which is what happens when you actually reach the end of the content. And part of it was probably that I never hit max level in EverQuest until, the next expansion came out, and then it was easier to hit the old level cap. I never ever got to end game because you die and you would lose experience. And you would lose levels. Like, if you've never played EverQuest, it was punitive when you died.
Yes.
Your corpse would sit on the ground right where you died, and you would lose experience. And if you lost enough experience, you would lose a level. And your corpse, you had to go and get it. Like, you didn't just resurrect at a graveyard and, okay, you're good to go, like in WoW. Like, you have to run, grab your corpse, which might be sitting in a basement of a haunted castle, and drag it out of the zone with mobs chasing you, because if you don't do that and you try to loot it there, they'll just kill you before you can get away.
And your corpse still had your armor on it. You were running naked doing this, and then you were having to slash corpse to be able to drag it away from you, so you had a macro of slash corpse as you ran with it targeted. It was insane. I still have slash corpse nightmares.
Yeah, corpse runs. That was a very, very real thing. That was a big part of the game. And because of that, I never got to endgame. So I always felt like whenever I would get online with my friends and make a little progress on a level or level up enough to reach the next zone, I always felt like I was making progress in the game. And I never hit the end. So that's probably why it didn't bug me.
That makes sense.
Yeah. After that, I think I kind of took a break from MMOs for a while. They're just, we fell out of it and I was doing other stuff. And then WoW came out when I was sometime in high school. And
Star Wars Galaxies had come out before that. Did you play it?
I played that a little. I tried it and I really liked it. And there's never been a game quite like it.
No, and I fell hard into Star Wars Galaxies. Like you did with EverQuest, all of my friends were playing this. And I love Star Wars Galaxies. And the reason I actually brought it up before World of Warcraft is because it's the game I quit to play WoW, and I had just gotten a Jedi. I'd gone through the holo grinding, and where the way that you got a Jedis weren't a selectable character, so you had to go through, and basically holocrons were out there that you could do that you had to master different professions. So every character had a random number of a random selection of professions that you had to master, and they were generated automatically when the character was created, and you could learn 5 of the 6 of them, and the 6th one was always a mystery, and you just had to basically at random pick things and hope you got lucky. Well, I hologround out my 5, and it took me about 6 months to do, of just constant macroing, constant playing, and I did it, and I made a choice. I got to the point where they were putting out the NGE, the New Game Experience, and I had to choose either finishing out the last 2 or 3 professions or going on my first vacation with my friends that we were going to take alone over spring break. And I chose spring break rather than holo grinding at that point. So I had to finish out my Jedi when they put in the village. It took me like an hour or so to get. But I still got a Jedi. I still consider that I holo grinded out my Jedi because I did 5 of the 6 and was within 2 professions of getting it. And I had my Wookiee Jedi and sold my Star Wars Galaxies account for a few $100s whenever World of Warcraft came out. So I didn't know if you had played it to the extent that I did specifically, because I had a guild guild, I had my town that I was with, I had my people, and I made really good like friends who I kept up with, and we were, real life friends, being able to talk kind of like you and me. So I was curious because it had a wonderful community, and didn't know if you got into that.
I played it enough to see the edges of that, but I didn't have friends that were playing, and I never really got into a guild for it. Like, I didn't make it super far. I played enough that in hindsight, I realized how interesting of a game it was. But at the time, like, I didn't have enough context for MMOs to appreciate it, if that makes any sense.
That does.
Now you can look back and go, that was amazing, because you could have entire characters, entire careers where you didn't have combat. Like, you could be a vendor, you could be like a dancer, right? You can be like crafters. And it was a legitimate way to play the entire game. It wasn't a side thought like it is in so many MMOs now. It was like a whole core experience separate from combat. And no one's really done that since.
They haven't. And the thing is that with those, being the crafter, being the dancer, they were integral to the other characters succeeding in the game, that you had to have armor crafters to be able to take down the hardest monsters in the game, because you couldn't get it. There wasn't loot off of monsters, really. It was a player-run economy. You had to have dancers and entertainers and musicians, otherwise everyone who came back from combat wouldn't have been able to get rid of their wounds that they did. You had permanent stat loss until you spent enough time watching an entertainer and resting, essentially. It was awesome to be able to have a completely player-run economy and player-run system, that if you went to a city and there wasn't a doctor around to heal whatever wounds you had, you couldn't do anything, that you were stuck until another player was there. And that sounds punitive now, but even now it seems like, oh, that would be kind of fun to actually have to rely on other people, but not to the point of Final Fantasy XI having to rely on people.
Yeah, like a modern version of the systems in Star Wars Galaxies would be really interesting to see, because they've learned so much about not making MMOs punitive, like we talked about, because nowadays that would just turn people off. But if you took some of the core concepts of actually having all of these things you could do that weren't combat, and have them be an entire game on their own that supported all of the other like combat roles, it could be a very interesting MMO. So yeah, I played a little bit of Star Wars Galaxies, and then I moved on to WoW, which I know you did too. And we can talk about WoW here in a second. I'm going to run through my WoW history really quick. Basically, I played vanilla. I reached level cap, but I never did end game content because it was just hard to do at the time because it was vanilla. So I stopped playing for a while. I didn't play most of Burning Crusade, which, if you don't know, guys, most of you listening have probably played WoW at some point, but Burning Crusade was the first expansion. I didn't play Burning Crusade, and then right before Wrath of the Lich King came out, some of my friends convinced me to get back into it. They said, no, Wrath is going to be really fun. You can play with us. You can level up with us. We'll do some endgame stuff. They're making it easier to do endgame, basically. So about 2 weeks before Wrath of the Lich King came out, I resubscribed. And by then, I think Burning Crusade was free if you bought Wrath, like ahead of time or something. So I never actually paid for Burning Crusade. So in 2 weeks, I just went through all of Burning Crusade. And like 2 days before Wrath came out, I hit level cap. And then I immediately went into Wrath. I played Wrath of the Lich King all the way through endgame. And that was the first time I ever reached endgame. I did raiding for the first time. I only raided a couple times, but enough to actually beat like whatever that first main raid was. And
Naxxramas.
Yes, I beat Nax. I want to say there might have been another one I played too, but I'm sure I beat Nax for sure.
Old War was the next one, and then you go into Trial of the Champion or Trial of the Crusader, and then it went into Icecrown Citadel.
Yeah, no, I just did Nax then. So I beat Nax, and then that was when I hit that end game gear grind, and I was like, I hate this feeling, and I'm done. So I took a break. I came back right when Cataclysm came out, and played basically Cataclysm all the way up to endgame, did the same thing, did whatever that first raid was once or twice, and then I was done again. And since then, I haven't been back to WoW.
And I had a similar experience to some of your stuff in WoW, but I was a raider. That when I started in one of the early beta or one of the late betas, and back when you could still play as a dwarf mage, and I loved it. And then when the Then when vanilla was released and you couldn't play that anymore, I chose a warlock. I was a gnome warlock and I played through, and then I decided that I wanted to heal. I didn't like DPSing, and that was the end of it for me. And I actually did find a group. I was really lucky that when I had a druid that I was healing with, I found a friend in... what was the dungeon called in Stratholme, where he was teaching me how to heal. And if this guy hadn't taught me how to heal, he recruited me into his guild, he taught me how to heal, and I stuck with these people that I found when this is back before the second tier rating came out. This is back still during Molten Core when it was first out. And I started raiding with these people, and they were some of my best friends. To this day, I keep up with some of them. I've met them in real life. Three of them came down to Tennessee and had a New Year's party with me. So what's up, John, Adam, and Eder? And they were the first people who I'd ever met online who traveled from Michigan and Indiana to come down and hang out with us. And they became people. They were people that we cared about each other. And, they stayed at my house. We stole Talonmar's clothes and out of the shower and poured cold water on him. I had a butt print in my car from where one of the guys dented it when trying to pick up the other guy. It was in the parking lot. It was the raiding experience in World of Warcraft. To me, wasn't about the gear. It was about doing it with these people. And as long as I was doing it with them, it was cool. And I did it through every expansion. I went as far as we could get into it, as hardcore as we could get into it with our both skill set and schedules. But I was the exact opposite of you in that while I would give up on each expansion eventually, it was at the end of the end game when I got burned out on that, but would continually keep in contact with the people I knew.
That's cool. I mean, I hear that from so many people that, the MMO is about the people for them, which I totally get. I just, outside of my actual real life friend group in middle school, high school, when we did EverQuest and then the beginning of WoW, I've never really had that again. But outside of that, I've never really gotten that again. So it's really cool. I love hearing the stories about it. And now I have so many online friends that if I did get back into it, I would know servers to go to. I would know people to go to get into a good guild. I don't know. I haven't gotten back into WoW since Cataclysm, basically. When did you stop? Is when because I know you don't play anymore, but have you played all the expansions up to this point still?
Yes, up to Legion. What had happened was I decided to I decided to cancel my account at the end of Cataclysm. I beat Dragon Soul, I logged my priest out, and I basically said I was done because my wife and I had a conversation where she said, I don't understand why you play this game. It does nothing but make you angry. I'm like, but I'm having fun. I love this game. And she's like, no, you're angry all the time. I hear you yelling curse words from the other room all the time. And then you come in here when you're done and you're mad. And I sit there and I look and I was like, yeah, that's kind of right. It puts me in a bad mood after I'm done. So I think about it for a while and I quit. And then Pandaria was released and I didn't care. It looked like an April Fool's joke, and that was that. I wasn't going to play anymore. And what happened was I got sick. And couldn't go to work, that I got mono. I was so weak that the only thing I could do, it was terrible to lay down, and the only thing I could do was sit up. So I would sit at my desk, and I found they were having a sale on Mists of Pandaria at that point, and I got it and actually had a wonderful time. I went through, it was late in the game. I experienced all the content, experienced the raid finder versions of the dungeons and the raids, and it was great. And then I got really excited for Warlords of Draenor after that because it was coming back to the Burning Crusade. It was doing that again. It was the fan service expansion, and that was my favorite expansion because that was one that I had most of my fun with my friends of playing the Burning Crusade. So of course I went back and played it, but I didn't do very much of the raids. I finished it. I did a couple of the in-game pieces of content, and then I got bored and quit again. And when they released the Hellfire Citadel part of it at the very end and the Tannin Jungle, or however it's pronounced, I did all of the daily stuff through it, completed all of the content there and saw almost all of the raid, and I just realized I'm done. This is a game that has not changed, and I have. It's not a bad game by any means, but it does not fulfill what I need in gaming anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you kind of got to the same point that I did, but in a different way. It sounds like if you hadn't gotten sick, you might have been done with it like a lot earlier.
Yeah, I really think so, because I got sick and I got bored and I didn't have anything to play, so I fell back on the old standby that I hadn't experienced it, I hadn't played it, that if I'd been playing single player games like we've been doing lately with the Final Fantasy games and things like that, I probably would never have gone back to WoW. But because I didn't have anything else to do, I was like, all right, WoW it is.
And I mean, WoW has kind of like, let's talk about WoW for a minute while we're here. Like, it's basically defined our modern definition of what MMOs are. And we live in the shadow of WoW now. And I kind of hate it, but at the same time, you have to respect it. Like, WoW is this huge juggernaut. It's basically the leader in MMOs and always has been, and looks like it will keep being for a long time. But it's like every game that's come out ever since Vanilla WoW feels like a WoW spinoff. Like, they took the systems and they tried to tweak it or change it or put a new setting on it. And like, even though it's hard to find someone who hasn't enjoyed at least some time in WoW, like, I want something different is kind of where I am now. Like, I don't want a new MMO to come out and it just be the same hotbar combat WoW feel. And it kind of bugs me that we live in an era where like every MMO kind of feels like that, which there are some exceptions, which I'll get to in a minute. But for the most part, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And one thing that we have to look at that I think that gets overlooked a lot nowadays, because WoW really is this mega success story that defines everything in this genre now. When it came out, it actually got a fair bit of criticism for being an EverQuest clone. That Blizzard was getting a bit of flack for taking what 989 and Sony had made and were just doing pretty much the same thing, but they took that same formula and polished it and did it better, which no one has been able to really accomplish because WoW did it so well.
Well, and I think that happened because it was before people understood that this is what Blizzard is excellent at. They're excellent at taking an idea, pulling out the core of it, putting it in their own world, and then polishing it. And they just polish it and polish it and polish it until it's the best version of that it can be. I mean, we know this with Overwatch. You know, it's basically Team Fortress 2. The core of it is Team Fortress 2. But they took it and they made it so much better and they polished it until it's wonderful. And here, now you have a shooter that's a Blizzard shooter. They did the same thing with Heroes of the Storm. You know, they took League of Legends or they took Dota or however, you know, whatever game you want to say they pulled it from and made it their own, and they polished it until it's amazing. Same thing with Hearthstone. I mean, I'm not mad at WoW, even though we live in the shadow of WoW.
Right.
Because we've gotten so many things out of it, and it's defined like all the MMOs after it, but we have gotten things like Hearthstone out of it. And like, I love Hearthstone. Is true. You know?
Yeah.
And that's really cool too. The other thing about WoW that I just wanted to mention, which kind of makes me sad, is I feel like it may have killed off Warcraft as an RTS game. Like, we haven't had a Warcraft 4, and it's been a long time. And at this point, I'm starting to suspect that we might not ever get a Warcraft 4, and that kind of makes me sad.
It does. And I'm not even a real-time strategy fan, but I want to play Warcraft 4 out of nostalgia. I want to play a future game out of nostalgia simply because of how much I loved the other ones.
Yeah, I loved like the Warcraft RTSs, and just as much as I love StarCraft. You know, they're really good.
And I don't like StarCraft. That's something, because like I said, I'm not an RTS fan, so I never got into StarCraft.
Yeah. So WoW is a huge game. We could probably do a whole podcast on it, and maybe we will later. Did you have anything else main big, you know, high picture view that you wanted to say about it?
Oh, not that I can think of, because we would have to really deep dive into WoW. I mean, if we talk about anything about World of Warcraft, we're pretty much going to go on to deep tangents.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to mention, before we get into a couple other topics here, questions about MMOs, like other games that I've played over the years, right? I'm just kind of, we're talking more deeply about these ones that we've invested a lot of time into. But as far as MMOs, I've sampled so many of them. I've tried so many of them for a month or so. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I did play Ultima Online a little bit, even though it was much later than you did, and I never really got into it. RuneScape, Star Wars Galaxies, like we talked about, Anarchy Online. I did try Final Fantasy 11. City of Heroes, Champions Online, Dungeons and Dragons Online, Lord of the Rings Online, Star Trek Online, all of these games with online at the end of them. Star Wars The Old Republic I played, and I wanted to love it, and I'd never been able to get into it. Guild Wars 1 and 2, both of those. Realm of the Mad God, which is kind of an interesting one. And then you said that you played a bunch of Asheron's Call and Asheron's Call 2, right? I never really did those.
I played some of Asheron's Call 1, and it was a good game. I played a decent amount of Asheron's Call 2, and it was fantastic. It was just ahead of its time. That it had talent trees, it had just an wonderful fast travel system that didn't make the world feel small, kind of like WoW Griffin Flight, and nobody cared. That was the main problem with Asheron's Call 2, is that so few people cared, they eventually shut it down.
Oh, that's sad. And then you tried more like free-to-play MMOs than me too, right?
Pretty much every free-to-play MMO that I heard about, I went, downloaded, and played it. I spent probably more time on Order and Chaos on my cell phone than a lot of them, just because it was on my cell phone, which is weird having a fully fleshed out WoW clone on your mobile device. But it was neat, is pretty much the best way I can put it. Same for Order and Chaos 2. Runes of Magic was one of the first ones I played, which is one of the first F2P MMOs like ever. It was one of them that really got the idea of microtransactions out there, and it was a really, really good game. It was a straight up WoW clone. There was no way around it, except it had subclasses. So I mean, Jennifer and Jeff, you can go play Runes of Magic. It's still around, but they had a lot of subclasses in there, which is something that people had wanted World of Warcraft to have, and it never put in. So it was interesting like that, but there was entirely too much microtransaction going on that I can't think of a whole lot of others. I played all the ones except for Realm of the Mad God that you had mentioned. I pretty much sampled everything I could get my hands on. I spent more time in Star Wars The Old Republic than most of them. Final Fantasy XIV, I got all the way to the end of the main part of A Realm Reborn and never got into Heavensward. I'm just trying to think. Pretty much anything online I tried. Marvel Heroes, even though it's not quite an MMO, I played a lot of it. Goodness me, EVE Online, I tried to like EVE Online. I wanted to like EVE Online. I still want to like EVE Online, and I think I'm better suited to reading about EVE Online than playing it.
Yeah, okay, I need to jump in here. So two things like that are more at the end of my history here, like all those ones that we glazed over that we tried these and we have opinions on them. So if you want to hear more about any of those things that we just ran down the list of, hit us up on Twitter because we'll gladly talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
We definitely have opinions. We just don't have 10 hours tonight to record. But Final Fantasy XIV is fantastic. And I've talked about that on the Final Fantasy episodes a lot. I didn't play it until like a year and a half ago when I finally hit the end of my Final Fantasy project, and so I kind of had to make myself.
Okay.
I went into it not expecting to like it because I hated 11, and 14 is amazing. Like it's probably the best MMO on the market, right next to WoW these days. I highly recommend it if you're a Final Fantasy fan, or if you like, the WoW style MMOs and you just don't want to play WoW right now. Seriously, check it out. And I went all the way to Endgame, and then I went into Heavensward, and I got all the way to Endgame of Heavensward before the first content patch. I haven't really been back since.
And it is, even though it is similar in playstyle to WoW, I think that even if you're not a fan of World of Warcraft, that you will still find things to like in Final Fantasy XIV, because it is just different enough to give you a completely different playstyle and a completely different atmosphere and feel. So even though we say it's the same style of game, it has just an entirely different aesthetic and feel to it. So don't feel as though they're the same.
It has amazing structures in place to build community in ways that WoW does not. It has all of these little things when it comes to dungeon finder and like level scaling and going through old content dungeons to help out newbies that, like, no matter where you are or how you get into those dungeons, you're always gaining something out of it, even if you're like end game, right? Like, they've built all these structures in place that WoW really needs to take a look at and then blatantly rip them off and put into World of Warcraft, because it would make the game
straight up steal it.
It would make the game better without a question. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. So if you don't really love the WoW community, but you like some of the core gameplay, you might want to look at Final Fantasy XIV. The other thing I need to mention, EVE Online, I spent a ton of time playing EVE Online because I wanted to love it. And this is the exception that I said that I would get back to. I said that basically every game feels like WoW with some exceptions. This is like the biggest exception.
Yeah.
EVE Online is its own game. And it is doing some amazing things. Like, if you don't know, EVE Online is a space game, right? You start out and you have like a tiny ship, and your pilot trains skills in real time, even if you're not sitting at the keyboard. So they have a companion app where you can like monitor your skills, make sure things are leveling up. Once you've mastered skills high enough, you can buy bigger ships if you have the money for it. There's a full economy in the game that's basically entirely player run. It goes from like mining all of the different like materials you need, to crafting blueprints, to actually crafting ships and components and things like that, to building giant battle stations, and to building things like star bases, you know?
Yep. They have I can't remember the name of the company, but they have an economist on staff to make sure that everything is regulated, nothing gets ridiculously out of hand. Or at least they used to.
Yeah, they do. They do, for sure. And the thing about EVE Online that a lot of people might not know, it only has one server. Like in WoW or any of these other MMOs we're talking about, the first time you log in, it's like, what server do you want to play on? And there's a list of 50 or 100 servers, and you pick one, and then you're with that group of people on that server forever, unless you pay for a server transfer. EVE Online, the entire population is on one server, and it's not one server sitting in a rack somewhere, but you know, it's not like one single computer in a data center is what I'm trying to say, but everybody's playing in the same world, and it's this massive server where you can go from one end of the galaxy to another, and you're in the same galaxy that everyone else who ever has played EVE Online is in. And that alone just makes it this like unique butterfly that is supremely fascinating to read about.
Especially with other games that have tried similar server structures, kind of like the Elder Scrolls Online and Guild Wars 2, where they still ended up having certain amounts of instancing and different versions of the same zone because their technology couldn't handle like that many people clustered together at once, where EVE Online doesn't deal with that. They still have one version, one instance of any zone that you go in. You're not going to have anything overlapping in the same space. It is you're there, and it is the one world, which no other game that I know of at least has.
Yeah, and you know, I've wanted to like it. Like, I've put a ton of time in because I wanted to find something to latch onto, because I love sci-fi. I love the idea of having one shared universe in a spacefaring, you know, world, basically.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point where if you're playing solo, it just feels like you're playing a spreadsheet. If not, you have to find like a group, and you have to find the right group with attitudes that mesh with yours. And I could never find that in the game, even though I know they exist out there. It's not easy for like a new player to really get into. I feel there's a huge learning curve on that game, and it's hard.
Yeah.
But I can't.
I don't understand it.
See, I understand it because I've read a ton about it, and I played a lot of it. Like, I don't know if I've talked to you about how much I played it, because
I didn't realize you had played that much of it. I knew we had talked that you had played it, but I had no idea that you had played it.
Yeah, and I really wanted to love it. I still want to love it. Every time a new expansion comes out or something massive happens in that game, I take another look, and I keep thinking maybe this will be a time to go give it another shot. So I don't know, maybe someday, maybe I might go back to it. But I can't talk about a whole MMO history without mentioning EVE Online, because it's this unique little butterfly that's kind of different from all of the other things we've talked about, and it's still there. Like, anyone can go play it right now.
And you know, weirdly enough, that's how I still feel about Ultima Online. That I can't find any other game that feels like Ultima, because even sandbox games don't seem to do that for me.
Yeah,
like that is how I feel. Like like you, I want to love it, but I can't go back to it.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so we get into a couple other high-level topics here, because, like I said, we're not diving deep into any one thing tonight, but you put Facebook stalking your MMO ex, nostalgia versus reality. So why don't you talk about it?
Okay, well, going back to Ultima Online, like this is what I had in my mind when I wrote that topic down, because Ultima Online is, in rose-colored glasses, this absolutely perfect example of a thriving world with good people who I took career advice from. You know, there was a guy on the Lake Superior server who was in the Scarborough Rangers who sat down with me and talked to me about becoming a psychologist, because he was a government research psychologist, and his name was Psycho. I'm not sure if I just said that, but who was a psychologist, and told me basically that if I wasn't planning on getting a PhD, that I was never going to be able to move very far into the field. And it was just astonishing to me. That was my first experience of this, you know, somebody who was older than I was. I was 17 years old at the time, looking at going into college, and I was having a career conversation with my guild master. And looking back, like I said, in these rose-colored goggles, it was just fantastic. Like, everything about it was great. That no sandbox MMO has ever been as wonderful as this, because they've never felt as though they were a complete world. And I knew pretty much every inch of this world, that I could recognize individual tiles on the mini-map. I'm not kidding. My roommate would call me over to his side of the room in college and say, BJ, where am I? How do I get back to town? And I would look at his mini-map, which was just a 2-inch circle with just dots on it in that indicated a forest. And I was like, you go about 3 screens down to the southwest and you're going to be in Vesper. And he's like, why do you know that? But I did. Like, I went all in on Ultima Online. And then I look back at it and I want to play it again. I think about all of this and I want to play it again. I think about all the fun I had, all the people I met, just how wonderful everything about it was. And I download it and it's bad. Like, it's not bad. It's bad compared to what I remember it as. The reality does not live up to the nostalgia, where the open world part of it has been changed by the further expansions, that just so much about it isn't what it was in 2002 and 2003, that, you know, I read so much about the game. I've seen where it is, and it's, you know, I would much rather think about the game. I would much rather read stories about it and tell stories about it and reminisce like old war stories, you know, the kind of thing where I get together with my friends and like we talk about, hey, you remember that one time we stole that guy's glacial staff? And it's like, yeah. And you remember that time, you know, I beat the guy to death with his own axe? And it's like, that was awesome. And just things like this I love, but sitting down at my computer, 33 years old, playing Ultima Online, it's like going back on Facebook and looking at your high school girlfriend and being like, man, I wonder what it would be like if we were together. And then it's like, nope, there's a reason we broke up.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from. I mean, for the MMO part of it, it's like, I feel this way about World of Warcraft, and I feel this way about EVE Online, because I've almost pulled the trigger on the last 3 WoW expansions, and right now, like, the hype for the current expansion is in full force, and I've almost bought it about 3 different times, and I
think it's more than 3.
I still might end up getting it, but it's this feeling, right? It's this nostalgia that I remember how much fun I had when I was having the peak amount of fun in the game.
Yes.
And when you go back and actually play, that's not what you get. You know,
never.
You have to like work back to it, and you might never reach it again. And I feel like that about Eve too. Like, I played enough Eve that I love so many ideas in that game that I want to love the moment to moment gameplay, and it never coalesced for me. But reading about EVE Online is one of my favorite things to do when I'm reading about gaming in general. Like, EVE Online makes some of the most fantastic stories out of anything that's out there.
And I don't even know the world, I don't know the people, and I don't know the game. But when I see an article about EVE Online, I read it. I love it.
Yeah,
it is really interesting.
Good. So we might have to do a whole episode someday about the idea of a game versus reality of actually playing it. But I think you hit the core of it right here. Besides that, I just wanted to like mention, it feels like in general, there's less and less MMOs hitting the market right now. And we're definitely like beyond that golden age of MMO gaming where we were getting new games multiple times a year. I feel like we're getting things like Destiny instead. These things that almost kind of feel like an MMO, but definitely aren't. But they fill that same void of like find a group, get together with a group, run content, and make progression. Like you make progress in the game together. You might have raids, you might have a guild, you might have core groups, but it's not an MMO. It's not a living, breathing world like these other games. And it seems like more and more those are what are taking the place of games that might have previously been MMOs.
And I don't know if I like that. And it's not because I'm an MMO snob or anything along those lines, but it's as though they're taking the elements that I hate the most in an MMO and putting them into another game. They're putting the gear. They're putting, grinding for tokens. They're putting in this mindless raid finding with strangers and not letting you find friends organically. They're not set up for community building because of game. And I'm thinking of games like Destiny and those kind where, I don't know, they just don't feel...
They feel different.
I don't even know.
They definitely feel different.
And it's not as though... They don't feel like worlds, like you said, and they don't feel social despite having people around.
Yeah, and it just doesn't feel like a living, breathing world. And I know that none of the other ones ever truly were either, but they felt like it more, like that gut reaction to the world. Mm-hmm. It's just not the same. So that was just kind of an observation that I had. That's kind of the way that games that used to maybe be MMOs are now becoming things more like Destiny. And I like Destiny a lot. Like, I just don't know how I feel about that trend in general. So it's something I've been thinking about. I don't really have any answers. It's just a thought that's been kicking around in my head.
And it's something I've noticed over the years too, and just really can't put my finger on what it is, why it is that I keep stopping playing them.
So the other question I had for you, is there anything that you want in future MMOs? Is there anything you're waiting for? Any like progress you'd like to see? Any new systems? Like, is there anything that you just want for, the mythological, hypothetical next gen MMO?
I'm really tired of action bar combat, and I don't know how to get away from it because I'm not a designer and a developer, first of all, but I'm really tired of having just, this never ending button and rotation combo, like action bar combat. Like, I hate rotations worse than anything else in MMOs. Like, everything we've talked about tonight that was good and bad, all of it, that the idea of a DPS rotation being that there is a perfect sequence in which I can execute my character's abilities and perform optimally is not fun. That's taking gameplay out of it, and it's just making it rote memorization. And I want a game that does not rely on that to succeed.
Yeah. Okay. So I think my main thing kind of ties directly into that. The thing that I want is I just want something that doesn't feel like WoW. I mean, like I said, Eve gets closest to it, but I think getting away from the hotbar combat would be a big step in the right direction. I don't want more games that take the core of WoW and just throw a new intellectual property over them, because that's what we keep getting. Like, I'm sick of that. I don't want that anymore. The thing I really want, I want to see the first big virtual reality MMO. And I feel like we're still a long way away from it because VR is going to be a slow adoption process. But that's what I want. I think VR, because it's a new medium, basically. To make an MMO in VR, you're going to have to redefine MMOs, and that's what I want, Right. I think VR has the highest chance of actually giving us something that's different from WoW, and I'm excited for that.
And I think that when the next generation of virtual reality systems come out, that we're going to get that. I don't think, and I haven't played VR, I've only played with an Oculus Rift Developer Edition. I don't know if I told you about that. Did I tell you I played with an Oculus?
No.
The Developer Edition of it? It was while I was in Chattanooga. The library had one, so I played with it. And it was cool, but the controls were exactly like you said. And that's where I'm going with it. It's like, until we can better control in virtual reality, there is going to be a disconnect, because it's never going to feel like a VR MMO if we're using a keyboard or a gamepad. And even with the handhelds, I don't think that targeting and things like that are going to work nearly as well as they could and they need to. We're going to honestly probably have to get some sort of haptic gloves. That's going to have to be the next one, at least, where it'll track hand motion somehow.
I don't agree with you. They already have it with the Vive. Nope, they've got it. You didn't play that. You played with a controller or a keyboard, didn't you?
Yeah, I was playing with a keyboard and mouse, but I mean, you really, even with those, can you manipulate it well enough that it would be an MMO rather than just like single clicks? Like, can you do multiple button presses and things like that with those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can shoot a bow and arrow in VR the same way I shoot a bow and arrow in real life, and it behaves correctly. Like, you have one-to-one movement with your hands when you're in a Vive. And until you get that, you feel like VR is a gimmick. And I totally get that. Like, I told you to expect that, too, if you ever played with a Rift and not a Vive. And so it doesn't surprise me that you walked away feeling like that, because I probably would, too. It was
exactly the way that you had said.
Until you get those controllers in your hand and you actually have room scale VR, you're not really getting, like, the core of the experience. You're just getting this little peripheral gimmick thing that... that's a whole nother topic. Just I worry that people's first experience with VR is going to be a bad one or a mediocre one, and they're never going to want to try VR again. I'm very apprehensive about the PlayStation VR because of that, because it doesn't look like it's really trying to do room scale. Like, the Vive is the only one that it just feels like this, like, a revolutionary technology, but it's hard to convince people to get it for all these reasons, which we talked about a lot in our VR episode, so I'm not going to dwell on.
Right. But I do totally see what you're saying with that too, and that was one of my big fears with the PlayStation VR, because I think you hit it on the head, and I think having a bad experience in VR is better than having a mediocre experience in VR, because at least you can see, oh, you know, this one is so bad, I'm going to try something else. But if you have just kind of a mediocre experience, you'll be like, I'm done.
Oh, yeah, it makes me sad. But yes, okay, you guys got kind of our overview of MMOs. You know where we're coming from now. And now if we want to do a deep dive later, we can. So if there's anything you want us particularly to talk about in another episode, let us know for sure. With that, it's probably time for our weekly geekery, where we share what we've been geeking out about this week. And actually, we recorded because BJ has been out of town, so it's going to be for the last like 2.5 weeks. I have so much geekery, I don't think I'm going to get through it all, and I'm going to have to gloss over some. So why don't you go first?
Okay, so this past weekend, I went to my very first tech conference. I was given a ticket to WordCamp Nashville, which is a WordPress users and developers conference. And Void had kind of pushed me toward the WordPress side of freelance development for a while now, and showed me, you know, what all could be done with it. And I'd fought it for a little while and had finally moved in this direction, and going to WordCamp in Nashville has completely 100% solidified that as I'm working on coding and software development, that it is actually going to be with WordPress and its constituent parts with PHP, JavaScript, jQuery, all of this, because the community at WordCamp was one of the most wonderful things I've ever experienced. As much as it sounds like on here, I am not that much of a people person. I can talk and talk and talk, but when put in a group, I'm going to sit in the corner and wait on someone to come to me. And the thing is, at WordCamp, they did. Like, I met so many people. I had so much fun talking with people who cared about the same thing that I cared about, who really and truly understood where I was coming from with a lot of this and didn't care that I was new and just starting to look for freelance clients. It was amazing. And I even went to the after party. This is the first time of any professional conference I went to the after party and hung out with the guys from WP Ninjas. I'm not sure if you use Ninja Forms or anything like that when you're doing things, but these guys are phenomenal. They are fantastic. And just to plug them and getting nothing from it, go look at Ninja Forms 3. It came out last week and it is awesome and I'm already using it. But like, these guys are great. And I drank in public, and that does not happen because I found blueberry mojitos and blueberry lavender mojitos, you guys. And I found them in Oregon and I found them in Nashville, and it's the only place in a year I've been able to find them. So I was around nerds who cared about what I did with the most absolutely delicious drink I've ever drank, a blueberry lavender lemonade mojito, and it's like just wonderful. Like, the community there welcomed me in, and I felt immediately like I belonged. I didn't sleep well on any night, and I was energized to go from about 4 o'clock in the the morning until like 2 o'clock the next morning and never felt like I was at a loss for energy. Like, that means that the community there and the freelancing that I'm doing through it is absolutely the right decision for me. So thank you, Void, for putting that in my head to do this and pushing me to those development tools that you showed me with Ultimatum and things. It is because if it hadn't been for that, I never would have gone to this, and it really changed my perspective on software development.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad you had a good time, and I liked getting all the texts about what was going on and what was new and what you were finding out. It's always cool. The other thing that I know you've played, which is also on my list for geekery, so I'm going to bring it up.
Right.
You tried Duelist because I kind of made you.
Yeah, you did. And you're like, dude, try Duelist. Dude, try Duelist. I'm like, I'm not doing anything yet. And you're like, dude, try Duelist. Dude, try Duelist.
Well, you were traveling. I told you once you get back to a computer, try it out. And you did. So
you did.
Basically,
and I did.
Duelist is a game that I tried out in early access, and it was okay. I saw a lot of potential there. And I think I actually wrote a blog post that said this game has a bunch of potential, but it's not quite there yet. And I saw a bunch of chatter on Twitter and on a couple gaming sites last week or the week before. It was basically like, hey, there's this game called Duelist and it's actually pretty good. So I turned around, I looked at it, and it's actually released officially now. So I gave it another shot. I went back to it, and it's really good now. It's really good.
It's really good.
Yeah, it basically, if you know these two games, it's somewhere between Hearthstone and Hero Academy. That's the quickest way to describe it. Basically, you get like kind of cards, but really more their skills. You like build a deck of skills. You get a hand of skills to choose from, which might be monsters, might be powers, might be power-ups, might be magic, whatever. And there's a whole tactical grid that I think it's like 6x6 or 5x5, something like that. You have a general on the grid, and you can summon more monsters based on what skills you have. So it has the core of Hearthstone where every turn you're getting a new card. You have like a certain amount of mana, and you can use that amount to use your skills. But you're moving your general around the grid, and you're trying to kill the other general. So it's not just a card game. It's like a tactics game mixed with a card game, but done really, really well.
Which is something for both of us that is like the perfect storm of awesome, because it is engaging and the games are still quick enough that they don't feel like they trudge on forever, kind of like Atlas Reactor did.
Oh, yeah.
Because I liked Atlas Reactor, but it was too slow. That one of my big issues with that game was that it was too slow, and I wanted a turn-based strategy game that was basically PvP. Duelist is quick. And right now, if you go to Humble Bundle, there is a free 20, you can get a free 20 pack of cards right now. You can get 20 packs of cards for free on Humble Bundle if you go this week while we're recording and releasing this. So go check that out, you guys, and give them your email so that you can get your free packs, because I did that this morning.
Yeah. It's a free game. I don't think we mentioned that. It's totally free to play.
It is free.
It doesn't feel like you need to put money into it, which I can't even say that for Hearthstone anymore, even though I love Hearthstone and it's technically free to play. Like, you need to dump some money into Hearthstone to get your cards up there. You don't need to do that at all in Duelist. Like, you could give them money, but you really don't have to.
I've been playing this for a few days now. I mean, it may be 4 days since I installed it, and I haven't spent any money, which is, 4 days, not a big deal. But the in-game currency comes at such a rate that there are daily quests, there are daily challenges, there are practice games you can get it for. You can do solo and ranked like Hearthstone, and you can also do solo challenges which reward you with different kinds of gold and currency or whatever it's called. And it's just lovely the way that they do it, where I've gotten so many packs of cards just from playing the game. And their daily quests are something that you and I have talked about loving. It's play this many online games. That it's not win. There are ones that say win, but there are also some that are just that I've gotten more of play 4 games online with this faction, and I love that.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. So I'm glad that you're liking it, and I feel like we'll probably talk about it more in the next couple weeks, because I see you still playing it. I think you you'll like it for a while.
Yeah. I think that was pretty much everything I've geeked out about, honestly, over the last couple of weeks. I'm still playing Final Fantasy IX. I've gotten to the part that I remember before as being the low point on Disc 3 when they separated my parties, and I am, for me, it's always with Freya and Quina and Amaranth, and this time it's Dagger, where I'm separated. I'm having to go through, I can't even remember his name off the top of my head right now, like they were prisoners. I'm having to escape, and it's just so hard and boring for me to go through this part because I didn't level up my side characters. And so I'm powering through little by little to get back to the main narrative.
Cool. So for me, I have a bunch of geekery. I'm gonna glaze over a lot of this. So I read all of the new Harry Potter short story collections. They're these little, they're not even novellas, they're short, and they're full of like little vignettes about characters or schools of magic or secrets of Hogwarts. I really liked them. They were really good.
Did you?
Yeah. So I would recommend those to any Harry Potter fan. They're much better than the old type of tie-in things that she did, like that Quidditch book and the magical creatures, and the ones that came out with the original books.
Yeah.
These are
I've got those.
These are much, much more interesting than those. So take a look at those if you didn't even know they came out. They're these little Harry Potter short story collections. Beyond that, I played a bunch of Blizzard games just because I've been at the back of my like gaming backlog, like I talked about. So I played a lot of Hearthstone, a lot of Overwatch, a lot of Diablo 3 actually, while I got my wife to listen to The Adventure Zone, which besides like our podcast network, The Adventure Zone is my absolute favorite podcast, and I finally got her into it. So I played all those games with my headphones off for like 3 or 4 nights in a row while we listened to the entire back catalog of it. That was really fun.
Wow.
Yeah, I read through Storm King's Thunder, and I think I'm kind of getting ready to maybe DM that for a group, which might be fun. A small group. It might just be my wife and my brother, but I really want to try like tabletop RPG soon. So Storm King's Thunder was the first official like D&D printed adventure that I read, and thought that it was like I wanted to run it. Like I've read a couple of the other ones because I own them, and I said, oh, that's interesting. But this was the first one I finished it, and I'm like, there were enough cool things in there that I could take that, make it my own, and it would be super fun. So I want to run Storm King's Thunder now. Beyond that, I'm still getting Gamefly games and flying through them. So far, I'm turning them all around in like a day, and that's fine because it means that I was right about these games. They're all B and C tier games. I didn't miss out on any like really sleeper hits or anything. So since last time we talked, I've played Just Cause 3, Ratchet and Clank, The Order 1886, Dragon Quest 7, and Until Dawn. The only one of those that I almost bought was Until Dawn because it's fantastic if you're a horror fan. I am not a horror fan, but Beej, if you ever get a PS4, you absolutely have to buy Until Dawn because you will love it. I know you will.
Is it on PC?
I don't think so. I think it's PlayStation exclusive.
I think it's just on PlayStation. Yeah, that was the reason I hadn't picked it up when we had talked about it before, I think, because I want to play that. That will... I'm glad that it's older now, though, where by the time... Well, it will be older. It will be older by the time I get to a PlayStation 4, so I'll be able to get it cheaper.
Yeah, and the thing with it, it feels like a Telltale game on steroids with real actors. Like, but in a horror setting. It's really, really well done. And I played, I don't know, maybe a third of it, I'm guessing, based on where I was. And the thing was, I get bored of the horror genre, but I can still appreciate the fact that it's like a very well-made game. And if you're into horror, you would eat it up. You would love Until Dawn. So if you are a horror fan and you haven't played Until Dawn and you own a PS4, seriously, go get that game. The other thing that I started this week that I've been thinking about pulling the trigger on for a long time is a Zelda project. So yay. Basically, like the Final Fantasy project I did where I played every Final Fantasy game in order all the way through and I beat everyone. I've been thinking about doing something similar for Zelda for a long time, but there are certain Zelda games that I knew I didn't want to replay or that I've played so many times that like I'm not in the mood to play it again, and I know it well enough that I don't need to. So I'm giving myself permission to do like a light kind of Zelda project instead of a full-fledged like I did for Final Fantasy, basically. It means that I'm going to at least try every game again and play every game enough to jog my memory and form a good opinion, and then write out at least one post and actually get all my thoughts out on every Zelda game in order, because I've never done that before. And I started this week. I knew that the first couple I would probably fly through because I didn't really want to replay the first one, but I mean, the original one, like, I beat it so many times as a kid, and it just, the way that the controls in it have aged, it gets kind of frustrating, basically.
It does. That's true.
Yeah.
It is very stiff, I guess, is the way that I think of it. It's not very fluid in the way that he controls.
Yeah.
Very rigid.
It is. And like the core of the Zelda gameplay is there, which is amazing that it was there in the very first game. But it's just like the controls haven't aged well, and it makes it kind of frustrating to play, especially because I beat it before. Like, I know my opinions on that game. Like, I just needed to play. I went in, I played a couple hours, I beat a couple dungeons. It was enough to like jog my memory and write a post. So I already did that one. I sampled the second game, which is the only one that I actively hate, and wrote my post about that one. Like, oh man, Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link it's horrible. Sorry, I know some people like it. It's not like the rest of the series, and I just don't like that game at all. I did those, and then I played A Link to the Past, and oh my gosh, A Link to the Past holds up. Like, it is amazing how well that game has aged. It is so good. Like, have you played it recently?
I haven't played it recently. It's been a while since I played it. It was on the Game Boy Advance, I think, that I played it. That was the one they did the remake on at first, right? It was the GBA, because that was the last time I played through, was on the GBA version, and I really liked it. I mean, Link to the Past is a phenomenal game, that there is no way around how good this game is, that it still always will hold the first game I ever called the Nintendo tip line to figure out what was going on, because my friend Luke and I were stupid, just straight up stupid. You know the part where it's about a quarter of the way through, I guess, where it may even be beating Ganon. I can't remember which enemy you beat. You beat the wizard, I think, and he like teleports up. We couldn't figure out where that you had to cut the curtain. It's all it took was cutting the curtain and going through the door. We spent hours searching to do something, and we could not cut that curtain. We never tried it, and we called Nintendo for help. Back when they had a Nintendo tip line.
So I had a guide handy, but I didn't use it a whole lot. I kind of just used it to look at the next recommended dungeon and like which section of the map it was in, and I tried to do everything on my own without actually looking at step by step. The only part where I actually had to look at the exact step to figure out what to do next is exactly where you're talking about. I could not figure it out. I mean, even now, in my late 20s, like almost 30, I could not figure out how to. There's a curtain at the top of the screen, and you're supposed to slash it with your sword. It is not messaged well. But besides that,
it is not. Besides
that, the whole rest of the game, like, it was great. I loved playing it. It's a really good game. It still holds up really well. Even compared to like a bunch of modern games, like I can't believe how good that game is. It's been a long time since I played it, and I'm really interested to replay A Link Between Worlds now, because it's obvious to me how much those games are just like the same world map.
Right.
It's like almost, it's not 1-to-1, but in my mind it feels like it, I've
never played A Link Between Worlds, and I've heard so many wonderful things about it that I really intend on playing it fairly soon, that I want to play it because I've watched a couple of gameplay videos of it, and it just looks simply wonderful.
So before I started this, I'm slowly building up my ranking of Zelda games now. Like, every game, I add it somewhere into the list, and I don't allow myself to reorder them as I'm playing through in order, which is the way I approach it. I know a lot of people, like, every time they beat a game, then they think back on the series, they allow themselves to move things around. I don't do that. As soon as one is locked in, I'm only allowed to put the new game between two existing, like, ratings. You know what I mean?
Okay.
In my list?
Yep.
So if I were to make a list before I started this from scratch, right at the top would be Wind Waker and A Link Between Worlds, because those are my favorite. A Link Between Worlds would probably actually be the top one, because it's really, really good.
Oh,
and now I'm really curious to see, in the context of the series, where those two land for me.
I am too, because Wind Waker is just just great. Like, it is so good, and I have a hard time believing that Link Between Worlds is better than it.
It's different for sure, but it's good. I mean, part of it there comes down to, do you like the 2D Zeldas or the 3D Zeldas? Because they feel very different in the moment to moment.
That's true.
And so I started Ocarina of Time again. I'm probably going to play a couple dungeons in, even though I've beaten that game a whole lot. I feel like the 3D games have not aged as well as the 2D games. And that's probably a bigger discussion for the inevitable Zelda podcast that will happen at some point.
True.
But yeah, it's just something I'm going to keep in mind as I go. Like, I think 2D games have aged a lot better than 3D games from the early 3D era. And we'll see over time.
I can totally see that, though. As wonderful as Ocarina of Time is, I'm not sure if the no jumping and controls and camera system would really translate terribly well right now.
Yeah, and we have said we will do a Zelda episode at some point. Those are games that we might do a deep dive on, individual ones too.
Yeah.
Like, even though I just beat A Link to the Past, I would love to play that again soon and do a whole episode on it, because it's really, really good.
And just by the way, so everyone knows, it didn't take him very long to beat this game, and I was getting text messages of screenshots that he was taking throughout the game, and they made me so happy that seeing this, like, it may have even been this morning that I woke up to a series of 2 of them as he beat them, that I woke up, checked my phone, and had screenshots of the end of Link to the Past, and it just made me giddy and happy, like I was playing it and seeing this, like, slow motion, not even motion capture, but stop motion playthrough of Link to the Past. It was so fun.
Yeah, it only took like 3 play sessions. I mean, I understand the vocabulary of Zelda games, so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a super long game if you're decent at Zelda. Like, I don't know. I don't think I'm that fantastic of a player, but yeah, it only took me 3 nights. It was pretty quick.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah. Okay. We've been going on for a while. You guys, if you want to ask us about Zelda, you can always write to us with comments, suggestions, or feedback, or if you want to talk to us about anything, really. Our email address is geek2geekcast@gmail.com, or reach us on Twitter, which is probably the better place, @geek2geekcast.
And if you want to get email updates about the network's podcast, you can sign up at geek2geekcast.net and just tell us which shows you want updates about.
I blog almost daily at agreenmushroom.com, and you can find me at grnmushroom. That's green mushroom without the E's on Twitter. I also was running the Video Game News Now podcast, but that is on hiatus.
And I'm on Twitter as @Professor Beej. It's Beej with 2 E's. And I do host the Geek Fitness Health Hacks podcast, but it has been on hiatus as I've been dealing with a whole lot of things in real life. And I will be on my way back with that soon. So if you want to listen to any of the back episodes of it, it's at geekfitness.net. And if you want to buy any of my fantastic science fiction and steampunk novels, they're at bjkeaton.com. Just saying.
We've been Void and Beej with your Geek to Geek podcast. That'll do it for this week. See you next week, geeks.
Bye, geeks.